welcome you all to Trek Wars. So today's video is going to be a discussion about the Galor class and if they were upgraded by the Dominion during the Dominion Federation Klingon-Romulan War. Now, there are several variants of the Galor. There is supposedly up to 5 variants. We only know of Galor 1, Galor 2, and Galor 3s that are talked about and spoken about on screen. And we know that the Galor 2 is said to be the most numerous starship. So, with that in mind, let's go take a look at what the Galor was when we originally see it with Captain Picard in the Enterprise. So, we learned some things in that first encounter. We learned that the Galor is significantly less advanced than the Galaxy class and the Nebula class, because we see them get completely shit-stomped by the Federation starships. So, we find out that the Galor's shields are 260,000. They take a few shots from Type 10 phasers, and then they go down. We also learned that the Nebula-class starship is able to destroy a Galor class using only its torpedoes. Now, we don't know how many torpedoes are fired. We just know that torpedoes are fired to destroy this ship, and it had 600 people aboard. And so we are pretty sure that this is also a Galor class, though we're not 100% sure. But even if that's not the case, we know for a fact that the most that ship can launch is 10 torpedoes. So now that we see that, we know that the shields are 260,000. We could subtract that and we can get an estimation of how powerful the hull is. Now, do we want an exact number? It would be much better. So in order to get an exact number, we have to look at a different fight that takes place before the Dominion War, which is the Klingon-Cardassion War. Alright, so we're going to ignore the shield strength. We'll get that from a different fight in a little bit. But we want to pay attention to how many times the Klingon bird of prey attacked this ship. It was 48 shots. Now, 10 of those dual shots are hitting the shields. So we know the shields go down, but before the shields go down, they withstand 325,000. Now, this ship had been under attack by the bird of prey for a while before the Defiant came in there. So we know that the shields are 325,000 at this point when they're collapsing, but we know that they were stronger than that. So we now have an issue where the 260,000 is not falling in with our ratios. So we do see that after the shields go down that we get 38 additional shots from the Klingon birds of prey, and then that gives us a hull strength of 1,235,000. So that gives us a defense of 1,560,000, which falls in the ballpark, which could be what we've seen with the Nebula class. But it doesn't seem right because we know that the shields were stronger, but we don't know how much stronger. But now from this fight, we have an exact understanding of what the hull strength is, and that's 1,235,000. So we do see a Galor that is attacking a Maquis Raider. We see the Maquis Raider fires at least 2 photon torpedoes and then a couple shots from its phasers. Now, we have a general understanding with some of our ratios that old torpedoes from Kirk era and the Type 10 phaser, a single blast, are around the same power output. So that should have been technically have been knocking the shields down by 50% for the Galor, but we know that the crew says that they did barely even touch the shields. So that tells us again that obviously the 260 marker, something's not right. Now, the reason for this is that we find out that there are several different variants of the Galor. There are Type 1s, Type 2s, and Type 3s. And we see that during the TNG episodes. So the very first encounter the Starfleet had with the Cardassion Galor, it was a Type 1. A Type 1 is a very old starship that has been around for a long time. The Cardassians then upgraded the same chassis and hull to a Type 2. Now, a Galor Type 2 is going to see some improvements and some upgrades. It's kind of like having an Excelsior from Kirk's era and then Excelsior from TNG. They've been upgraded throughout the time period. And that's exactly what we're seeing here and why there's a difference between the two. So when we analyze a certain scene, some of you guys were able to point out something that I missed, which I'm really grateful you guys did so. So you guys actually answered a question for me. I was always wondering about the Galor 2 shields. And so we get an idea of what the Galor 2 shields are from this scene. So I was calculating them as just single blasts and then, giving that 65 ratio, which is absolutely wrong because every time we see it fire, it's just a millisecond. Now, if you slow down the scenes to 0.25 and then you start counting the blast, you'll find out that the first phaser is 6 seconds, the second phaser is 5 seconds, the third is 3 seconds, the fourth is 4 seconds, and then the other ship comes in and it fires for 3 seconds, and then the other galaxy number 2, I'll call it, fires for another 3 seconds. So what ends up happening is we get a total of 24, which is 1,560,000. It's an extremely high number. So once we realize that, we go back and we analyze the scene, we can see that the actual shield power for the Galor would be around 715,000 for a Galor Type 2. So we do see an increase during this time period from 260 to 715,000. Now, I'm not saying the 715,000 is actually upgraded by the Dominion because we know that the Cardassians had a stronger shield, but we didn't know what it was. So I'm going to assume that what had happened is the Galor 2 already had that attack power or the shielding of 715,000. So we know that the Type 1 Galor has a shield of 260,000, and we know its hull value is 1,235,000, so it gives a full defense of 1,495,000, which falls in that category of being able to be destroyed by the barrage of 10 torpedoes. So now we know what was going on. We know that those first 2 Cardassian ships that were engaged by Federation starships, which were the Nebula and Galaxy, were fighting Type 1s. All right, so we look at the Type 2. It's 715,000 for the shields. The hull value is 1,235,000, so it gives a total value of 1,950,000. So we know that this is higher than what we see it doing. So we know that the Nebula's barrage of torpedoes wouldn't have killed the Type 2. So we know the first encounters with the Galors were Type 1s. Now, so a Galor 1 and a Galor 2, you really can't tell besides by their performance because they use that red navigational deflector. Now, there is an orange navigational deflector, and that is seen only with the Type 3s. Now, we don't see Galor Type 3s fight. We don't see any data on them, so we know really nothing about the Galor Type 3. So we have to use outside sources in order to acquire that information. And basically, I'm going to tell you is a Galor 2 and a Galor 3 are very similar, except that the shields have a higher ratio and around 950,000. So everything is pretty much stock and the same, except for they have an increased shielding. That's really the only difference I see with the Galor Type 3. Now, the only other thing that I can say about the Galor Type 3 is the response from the crew is very different when they are approached by a Galor Type 3 than a standard Galor. Captain Picard and the crew don't really take the Galor classes, either the Type 1 or Type 2s, very serious. But when it came to the Galor Type 3, they were more on edge. And there are some differences that we know. So we know the shields are obviously going to be stronger. Like I said, we have the estimation. The ship is capable of launching photon torpedoes, which the other ships can do, but it uses some kind of almost like a plasma torpedo, which I really think that all the ships have, but we only see torpedoes used on the Type 3 variant. Now, I do think the Type 3 variant has better weaponry, but we'll save that till the next part. All right, so now we're going to talk about the Kelton class. So the Kelton class has a stupidly strong shield, right? It's 1,733,333. This is an exact number based off the USS Defiant attacking the ship and bringing its shields by 30%, which is set on screen. So this is what it ends up being based upon those stats. The problem with this is we never see a Cardassian ship, even during the Dominion War, ever use a shield this powerful. So before, I've speculated that the Type 3s had this kind of shield power. I don't think so. And one of the things that I obviously should have paid attention to and thought about, and I don't know how I missed this, is this ship is built by the Romulans. So when I realized that and I thought about it, I went, oh, how did I miss this? Obviously, this ship is faster. This ship is faster than it's supposed to be, because remember when we see Galdecott and he talks about how this Kelton class ship is moving faster than any Kelton ship he's ever seen. Well, that's because he's never seen this ship before, because this ship is the Kelton class body and frame, but its internal structures are built with Romulan technology. So this ship's ability to fire more than we ever see Cardassians do is because of Romulan technology. Its increased shields is probably a Romulan warbird shield. And yes, the shield is not as high as a Romulan, or it's lower than a Romulan warbird shield, but that's because the ship is so much smaller, the shield bubble is stronger. So this ship is using a hybrid between Cardassians and Romulan technology. So I'm not going to put this shield in there because we know all these ships are destroyed and we don't see them used during the Dominion War. Now, when it comes to the weapons, though, this is where things get crazy. I really don't think that the Galor's shields were improved. I think they were pretty much the same. And I think a lot of it has to do with the abilities of integration between different races' technology. So we know it can be done, but we know that there's always limitations. And we especially know this by what had happened with Cardassians and Federation technology and the issues they had integrating, which would have been the exact same scenarios with the Dominion and the Cardassians. So with that being said, we know that the original ship that we see is able to fire approximately 9 times. We see that during Deep Space Nine. That's the most that we ever see a Galor do, and it would have been a Galor Type 2, and it would be hitting for around 65,000, which would be equivalent to a Type X phaser, which is what is stated. And so at 9, that would be 585,000. Now, we see the Kelton later on during Deep Space Nine, right before the war with the Klingons, that this Romulan hybrid is able to fire 14 times, which is 910,000. That just happens to be the exact same amount of maximum volleys that a Galaxy class can do. So we went from half to a Galaxy class firepower through the Kelton. Now, the Kelton has got Romulan technology, and I think that's what's going to lead to the next upgrade that we for sure see with some of the Cardassian ships. So we'll take a look at the fight scene, and I will show you what I mean. We'll see the Galor actually hit almost like a small siege cannon. So it's going to be so powerful that it's able to destroy a Miranda in 4 shots. So destroying a Miranda in 4 shots doesn't really seem that powerful, but when you realize the strength value of the Miranda and you're seeing the power output level in order to do that, it's almost like this ship is using a siege phaser. But we know that they're not using a siege phaser. It's just a modified version of a Galor spiral wave disruptor cannon. Now, the other thing I want you guys to take in consideration is, remember, they did get a hold of Romulan technology. So there is a possibility that rather than the Dominion actually updating, we know that the Dominion technically updated the ships, but I wonder if they were able to reverse engineer the Romulan technology that they had gotten from the Kelton class and then implemented it into the upgrades of the Type 2. So we can tell that there's obviously been some kind of major upgrade to the amount of output that the Galors are doing. And we can definitely see that through these fight scenes where you can see where they're attacking the Mirandas, and the Mirandas are taking an extraordinary amount of damage. Now, this is the battle that what I'm about to talk about takes place, but I don't have it in this battle scene. But basically what you'll see in the background is there's a Miranda ship in the background that gets blown up by being hit 4 times by the Galor weapon. So if we take the hull and then the shield value points and then divide them by 4, it's 168,750. Now, I did not realize this, and then when people were talking about this and pointing this out, and it kind of started to make sense when we talked about the Kelton and the Romulan upgrades. So I'm thinking, so the Romulan disruptor is 175,500 and it's 168,700 or 750. That's not that far off. I'm wondering if there is something about the Galor Type 2 that's been upgraded by the Dominion that is maybe a modification of what was being used with the Kelton. And because the energy output level is not that far off from what the Kelton is doing, but instead of sending lots of small blasts, they're just charging up and then shooting one large blast a few times. It's kind of like a shotgun. Okay, so let's look at what we've seen. So at the top there, it's talking about the spiral wave disruptors. This is the weak weapons. Shoot 13 times, 97,500. Now we go down to the first spiral wave cannon, which is a medium cannon. We're not going to care about that. No, spiral wave cannon shoots 9 times, 585. Right. So then we see the Kelton doing 910,000, shooting 14 times. And then we see that spiral wave that we were just talking about. That I said it's kind of like a Romulan disruptor. Now, it's shooting 5 times, but its only calculation is 843,750. So it's possible that the energy sources that were being used to power up the Kelton have been implemented into the Cardassion Galor Type 2. Now, the spiral wave disruptor cannon on the bottom there, we're not going to talk about that variant yet. Okay, so this is my idea, guys, about this. Is so the Romulan Warbird, right, and the Cardassion Kelton class ships that were working together, they were obviously using Romulan technology. I think that the Cardassians still have the specifications for these upgrades. So rather than building a bunch of Kelton class ships, the Dominion felt that it was more, quicker, more effective, and they got more value out of just taking Galor Type 2s, which are designed to take upgrades. And then what they would do is they would add an additional power source in there. And they're not changing out the warp core, they're just adding an additional power source in order to charge that weapon that's in the navigational deflector. So that very large spiral wave disruptor cannon. Now, in order to do that, the channel between the warp core to the weapon system has to be modified. So you would have to make it larger so more energy can be taken into it, going from the new weapons pod to the spiral wave disruptor cannon, because you're going from 65 to 167, whatever it was. And so that's a huge increase. It's like, 2 or 3 times higher. So you would the power conduits would have to be replaced for that area. But the modifications for doing this would probably take about a month. All you're doing is adding some additional conduits, a power source, and then there's nothing really else being done. It's not like the Excelsior where it's going to take 6 months when you're basically redoing the entire ship, quantum torpedoes, Type 10 phasers. The entire ship has to be completely reconfigured. This is basically a simple upgrade the Dominion did. So the real question is, why did they do this in the first place? Because you're losing technically some firepower by doing this. Well, pretty simple. They wanted to make it like a shotgun, like I said. It's designed to take out smaller ships in a very quick manner. So Miranda's, Constitution, Constellations, Excelsiors, these kind of ships are going to take heavy damage very quickly, and shields will get overwhelmed from this really, really high-powered weapon. So, in my opinion, it's designed to destroy small Federation starships. And when I say small Federation starships, I mean ships around the caliber of the Miranda. It's designed to take them out in just a couple of shots, move on to the next barrage, and then take them out. Give you a real simple explanation is, from a PowerPoint perspective, the Jem'Hadar fighters, the Raiders, are much more effective at destroying capital ships than the Galors are. So Galor 1s are going to really struggle against capital ships. Galor 2s are still going to have a really hard time against capital ships. The Dominion can overwhelm capital ships, and they have such powerful weapons, and they fire so quickly and so fast that they can quickly overwhelm capital ships. And so the Dominion bug ships, though, on the other hand, because they're only able to fire forward, they struggle against smaller maneuverable ships. So the Dominion bug ship is maneuverable, but when it comes to something that's as maneuverable as it, then it starts to struggle. This is where the Galor steps in. So the Galor can take more of a beating, and it can take on those little small ships and blow them away very quickly, opening up a gap for the Raiders, which is the Dominion bug ships, to do their job. Now, the very last modification we've seen at the very, very end of the Dominion War. So this modification is extreme. So we see a Galor class ship, which we don't know what kind it is, but I'm going to speculate that it is probably a Type 3, a Type 4, or some kind of new variant. And what we see going on is that Spirewave Disruptor Cannon, it is hitting for 650,000. So it is an actual siege weapon mounted inside the Galor. So it shoots only 4 times, so that's 2,600,000. This is one of the most powerful weapons in all of the Dominion War for a ship of this size. It's really, really powerful. So this is on specs. This is even higher than the Klingon Vorcha class cruiser's heavy Spirewave Disruptor Cannon. That's how powerful this is. Now, it's not at the level of the siege cannons on the main Klingon battle cruiser, the Nikbar, but it's up there. Okay, so for this modification, it's not like the last one. This is major modifications, because a Galor 1, 2, or 3, there is no way that any of those warp cores can produce this much power. So you would need to obviously have a new warp core or an additional warp core, and then you need to add those components that allow for the more powerful weapons to cross through, like the conduits. And they would have to be a lot, or they would have to be totally redone, because you're going from 67 to the 600 range. Like that's a massive increase, that the modifications to the ship just to fire that weapon, they have to be extensive. But when they're at the end of the war, they're running low on ships, and they're absolutely trying to do anything and everything they can to stay in the fight. And so I don't think that this would have been done if it wasn't for the fact that they were so desperate that they needed something that could handle the numbers. Because you remember, at this point, the Dominion lost most of their shipping facilities. They were being surrounded by the Romulans, the Klingons, and the Federation. And they needed a weapon that could handle those big, giant ships. You have galaxies, you have nebulas, you have sovereigns, you have warbirds, you have the Vulture class cruisers. Like, you have a lot of really big ships, and if you have a really big siege weapon, then you can actually take those ships out pretty effectively. So, and the reason that we know the power output is so insane and so high, it was able to destroy a Bree warship in 2 shots, and it could obviously destroy a Jem'Hadar ship in 1 shot. So 2 shots in order to take out a Bree ship, that's enormous. And so that's where that 650,000 attack power comes from. All right, so that theory about possibly being Romulan reverse engineered technology. So the spiral wave cannon at the very end, 650,000 per shot. It's 2,600,000. Now, the Romulan disruptor is 175,500. It can shoot up to 12 times. And then that is 2,106,000. So you can see it's even stronger than the Romulan weapon. But I think, and I speculate, it could be a derivative of Romulan disruptors, modified by the Dominion and obviously the Cardassians. So, was the Galor modified by the Dominion? Absolutely. Was it modified significantly? Sometimes. So, I don't think the shielding on the ships was modified that much. We don't really see that based on what we see before and during the Dominion War. So we know the Galor 1s and Galor 2s were using Galor 2 shielding during the war. So Galor 1s and Galor 2s, I really don't think that Galor 1s were really around during the Dominion War, because they would have been upgraded to the Galor 2 standards, which wouldn't have been too hard to do. So first ship, Galor 1. Second ship is a modified Galor 2. Now, a Galor 2 would normally have the same firepower as the Galor 1, but because it's got that modification, it's got that higher output level. Now, the Kelton, 14 shots in the 900,000 range, that is Cardassion Romulan hybrid technology. So there could be an argument that that technology was introduced into some of the other variants, and that's what I was saying, but we don't 100% know that. But we do know that the last Galor that we see is absolutely 100% a hybrid of Dominion technology. Getting 2,600,000, even if they were, cannibalizing Romulan technology to get that weapon power, the fact that they were able to do modifications and do this, obviously the Dominion were doing this, and the Cardassians wouldn't have been able to do this on their own. So obviously from the Dominion perspective, we can tell that when it came to the Cardassians and Galor, survivability wasn't as much an issue or important to them as bringing additional firepower. So they were more concerned about obviously improving the firepower of the Galor, and they did not really pay that much attention to the shielding based on what we've seen here. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.